Have you ever been told that speaking in tongues is not for today? Maybe you've heard people speak in tongues and it seemed weird. You thought to yourself, this is too strange to be God. Or maybe you believe that people can still speak in tongues today, but that it's not for everybody. Whether you're skeptical or intrigued, whether you speak in tongues or don't, my new book, 9 Lies People Believe About Speaking in Tongues, is the book for you. Get your copy wherever Christian books are sold and head over to stevebremner.com and click on the first link on the homepage for more information about how you can spread the word. Enjoy the show.
Dropping some knowledge and a little love. This is the Fire on Your Head podcast with your host, Steve Bremner. Steve Bremner, missionary to Peru and blogger at stevebremner.com. The podcast where we tackle gray areas your pastor doesn't talk about. Ladies and gentlemen, Steve Bremner.
Greetings. Welcome to Fire on Your Head, the only podcast that can make the Kessel run in less than 12 parsecs. I'm Steve Bremner, and I want to do something today that I've never done with an episode of the podcast, or at least not with any recordings I've made that have seen the light of day. A number of months ago when I was testing out my little sound booth here, getting used to using this new microphone, I recorded an episode where I shared some of my book recommendations. I shared audiobooks that I've listened to that have had an impact on me, Kindle books I've read over the years that have really helped shape the direction I've gone in with podcasting, with blogging, with writing books. And that episode, unbeknownst to me when I was recording it, had a lot of construction or something going on nearby that you could faintly hear in the background. And it was distracting to me as I edited it. I thought, if I can't stand listening to it, the audience might not. But I was just recently listening a second time to the episode I recorded with Dave Edwards. I think the title we gave it was Go For It. And we talked about going for it, whatever that looks like for you. And because we're both writers, because there's aspects of our lives that preaching the gospel, creating content of some kind, in my case a podcast and books and a blog and stuff like this, those are the reference points that I can turn to. So today's episode is going to be really specifically like that, but with some broader appeal, I hope. I mean, I'm going to primarily talk about writing and why, if you're feeling like you're gifted with writing or you are called to write but you haven't started yet, I'm going to share some things from a Kris Vallatton article he posted this week, basically quote from it entirely, and then add some thoughts and some recommendations, some tools. But every time I do a podcast that's specifically about writing, it's a very specific niche topic, so I have a drop-off in listens. Even that episode with Dr. Brown, where I had Dr. Brown on, he shared it on his Facebook, and I obviously shared it all over the place. But it's still got like just simply above average for the type of hits a normal show of mine gets. And every time I've done a show that's specifically about blogging or specifically about writing, there's fewer of you who check it out, and so that's fine with me. That today is a show that's like that. If you're the type that skips those episodes, I'm not offended if you skip today's episode. But I do hope as many of you as possible continue with me on this, because some of the recommendations I'm going to get to aren't for writers, but I've applied them to my life in the context of writing and forming discipline and creating time for my hobby, my passion, whatever you want to call it. In my case, I do feel it's part of my gifting. So Kris Vallatton posted an article called Writing to Leave a Legacy. And for me, it's just a simple write-up of something that he's already impacted me with at least 6 years ago. And 6 years ago, well, I've always been listening to his podcast. He's one of the people whose I listen, it doesn't matter what he's preaching on. He could get up at Bethel, read from the phone book. I'll listen to it. He's interesting. He's funny. If you've never heard of him, he's very humorous. And 6 years ago on his podcast, he had this guest opportunity at some kind of writing conference or something. And one of his messages was called Writing with the End in View. And then another one was called I forget, but it was something like this title, Writing for a Legacy. And I listened to each of those at least a dozen times in 2010. And if you listen to the podcast, the interview I had with Michael Brown, he was down here in 2010 when I was a part of the fire ministry. And I asked him questions about writing, and the things he told me over lunch had an impact on me. And around the same time, on my iTunes, on my iPod, or whatever, were these messages by Kris Vallatton that God was using to speak to me at that time in my life. And it helped me with the podcast and my blog at the time. I knew I would write books, but I was not there yet. It helped me with creating content that is not trendy or based on fads, but that would be evergreen and could sit on the internet for decades. So I try to do a podcast like that. Technology is ever changing. So, especially with how fast it changes. In the last 9 years, the way people have listened to podcasts has changed. So I could be talking about iTunes. I could be talking about certain things. When I listened to episodes from the first year I podcasted, the iPhone had just come out. People didn't have apps and listen to streaming content and the kind of things that we just take for granted now. As little as 9 years ago, were unheard of. So it's a challenge, but when I stick to the Bible and I stick to the things I'm talking about, I try as hard as possible to be evergreen. And then the episodes that I touch really flash in the pan moments in cultural history. I feel like those don't last. They don't stay relevant in the archives. So I got that from Kris Vallatton. Talking about and even just his eschatology and having a positive eschatology and not the walls are caving in and everything's going to get worse type of attitude, but leaving an inheritance for his grandchildren's grandchildren. That had an impact on me, and I still to this day try to do the podcast in particular in my writings in a way that if people of the future they read these things, do I write about things that are time relevant or stuff that can still speak to people centuries from now? So that's what I'm going for. So he says, with regard to writing leaves a legacy for the generations that will follow you. And if you have ever wanted to write, here are 5 points to inspire you to go for it. And his first one is inform, encourage, equip, and train people. Teach people what you have learned so they can stand on your shoulders and reach greater heights. Encourage people to live life to their fullest potential. Ralph Waldo Emerson said, "In art, the hand can never execute anything greater than the heart can inspire." Call people to action. This is his second point. Many credit Thomas Paine as one of our founding fathers because of the way his writing inspired the American Revolution. He wrote to George Washington in the toughest times and encouraged him and his troops to press on against enormous odds. Number 3, help people find their destiny. Habakkuk 2 verse 2 says, "Then the Lord answered me and said, record the vision and inscribe it on tablets, that the one who reads it may run. For the vision is yet for the appointed time. It hastens toward the goal, and it will not fail. Though it tarries, wait for it, for it will certainly come. It will not delay." And this kind of stuff is what he talked about in these messages. And if they're still online, if he still has them on his website, I'll link to them in the show notes when I publish this. Because I really, if you are like me, if the kind of things I talk about on this podcast, and especially with regard to writing and blogging and maybe even podcasting resonate with you, then you will devour those MP3s. So I'll try to find them, see if they're still up. But he goes on to say, prophecy is history written beforehand. When we stop hoping for the future, we cease prophesying to the next generation, and it results in a hopeless generation. We are called to honor the past, live in the present, and look to the future. Words become worlds, and history became his story through prophetic declarations. Number 4, inspire people to new ways of thinking. Christopher Columbus didn't discover the New World because he was braver than most sailors or more experienced. He had a revelation that the world was round. That core value gave him insights that inspired him to go where no one had ever gone before. And number 5, invite people into an experience. When we have an experience, we can reproduce that through words or art. Whatever is created from an experience becomes an invitation to that experience. Write with God. When you write with God. There is a difference between writing under the anointing and writing with your gift. Revelation 4:1 says, "After these things I looked, and behold, a door standing open in heaven, and the first voice which I heard, like the sound of a trumpet speaking with me, said, 'Come up here, and I will show you what must take place after these things.' Sitting in heavenly places gives us foresight and enables us to write at a new level." And so that's from an article Kris Vallatton has posted this week, or at least this week at the time I'm recording this. I don't know how long I might sit on it before posting it. And another thing about doing an episode like this, where I want to give you as many tools as I can. Obviously, the list of things I'm going to share with you today is by no means exhaustive, but I'll link to everything in the show notes. If you decide to go to Amazon and buy any of these books that I recommend, or go to Audible and download any audiobook versions that I recommend today, I definitely would appreciate it if you could go through stevebremner.com/Amazon. And the reason for that is because, yes, it's an affiliate code, and you can basically help support this podcast with your normal spending habits. So if you're like me and you're reading on Amazon and Kindle and things, why not throw like 5 or 6 or 7% of your purchase my way and help us? That's basically the way I buy books. It doesn't pay our rent, but it helps me buy new books when all that adds up, and Amazon sends me the commission. It's enough to sit down and it pays for itself. I go back and recycle that into some of the stuff I read. So you definitely be helping us out in a way where it saves us some expenses, and yet you don't have to change any spending habits or send a donation somewhere and still be helping the podcast. So that's stevebremner.com/Amazon. So I'm going to get to those recommendations in a minute, but if you listen to that Dr. Brown episode about writing, especially publishing, I asked him about his tools of choice. I asked him what he writes with. I use Scrivener. I don't know if you call it Scrivener or Scrivener. I know how to spell it, but I don't know how to pronounce it, because I've heard people pronounce it both ways. And it's a word processing software, but it's especially geared for writing long documents, scripts, novels, things where you're dividing it into chapters and sections. And when I started using it, when I finally learned how to use it, I was kicking myself that I'd never started using it before. And I wrote all of 9 lies people believe about speaking in tongues in Scrivener. And the books I wrote before, I had used Word, or I write in Pages and have to convert it to Word because somebody might be not using a Mac and they use Word or whatever. And I really started to appreciate Scrivener once I knew how to use it. So that's where I'm going with my next comment. I recommend Scrivener if you're going to be writing a lot. But it took me like a year before I finally learned how to use it, because it's got such a steep learning curve. But I'm in writers groups where people ask each other questions, and I go, "Oh, I do that in Scrivener." Yeah, well, I'm not going to buy Scrivener, or it looks too hard. I'm not going to use it. Recently someone posted in a group I'm in, and they were struggling with certain aspects of converting their document. And I said, well, in Scrivener, I automatically have table of contents made when I convert to the Kindle document. Well, in Scrivener, I don't have to scroll up and down through a lot of, pages like if I'm doing a Word document, or, and I just, nobody really, I don't get like a commission. I have a thing on my website where, I get something if you buy Scrivener through my link, but I'm not shilling for them for any other reason than I really do appreciate this software. I like using it, and I wish I'd learned how to use it sooner, and I could have streamlined the writing process for some of my other books. So if you do want to get it, and you're willing to invest in some time learning how to use it, I have a pastoral friend from England named David Lee Martin. So he's prepared a course called Scrivener Unleashed, where he offers some of the only teaching out there that I'm aware of that focuses on both the Mac and the Windows version of Scrivener. It used to be when I would Google or go to YouTube, you could find one or the other. But David has taken time to prepare these over-your-shoulder tutorial videos for both versions. He let me sample it and see how it works, what he teaches in it. So I'm behind it. I recommend it. The cost, if you're interested, the cost of his training is $97, and it contains, like I said, comprehensive over-your-shoulder videos. But listeners of the Fire on Your Head podcast can get a 50% discount when you enter the coupon code Fire on Your Head at checkout. So I'm going to post a link to this. And since David's a friend of mine, and he let me have a membership of this course, and he made this offer for our listeners, I'm not like under any compulsion where I can't admit that I get an affiliate commission or something for it. So if you want to learn how to use that and know that you're helping me out at the same time, use that coupon code. It helps track that you got it through my link, but also you get a discount on it, and you're helping support the podcast. If you buy anything that I've talked about or recommended in today's episode, you can rest assured you're also helping me and Lily out at the same time. So go to the link stevebremner.com/Scrivener Unleashed. And if you spell Scrivener Unleashed wrong and you use one word or you use a dash, it doesn't matter. You'll still be taken to the right link. And again, don't forget to use the coupon code Fire on Your Head, one word, because you'll get it for half price if you do. So if you're not a writer, you're not interested in that stuff, but you're still listening to this episode, I have some other recommendations that if you have some kind of creativity, you have some kind of passion for maybe quitting your day job, but you need to get going on this business of yours or whatever. You need help thinking outside the box or the four walls of where you find yourself. Keep listening. I got some more for you. So I'll just wrap this up, today's episode, with some of my audiobook and Kindle recommendations and give a little explanation as to why. A number of years ago, someone recommended to me a book called Die Empty: Unleash Your Best Work Every Day by Todd Henry. And it covers the importance of using our time on this planet to do work that really matters. It's not a Christian book per se, but I share it in this context because of how it talks about, not waiting. It talks about putting in, and if you want to call it, sowing now. Instead of, in the introduction, I remember he talked about graveyards are the burial place of many ideas, because people take with them their ideas to the grave. They never implement them. They don't think they can get out of a situation they're in and chase their dream, do what it is they feel passionate about and want to do with their talents, their gifts. So I recommend that book, but also Todd Henry's got this other book, and I listened to both of these as audiobooks, and he narrated one, and the other was done by another narrator, but the other one, the more recent one I listened to, was called Louder Than Words: Harness the Power of Your Authentic Voice. And this is more important than ever when there are so many people and groups out there who are clamoring for people's attention. And so who's going to stand out? If you write or you present or you market or you do something the same as everybody else, then you're not going to emerge at the top of the dog pile. So he talks about that. He talks about the groups that will stand out and be listened to are the groups who have developed their own authentic voice. And Todd lays out why that's important in his book, this particular book. In essence, an authentic voice is vital to create a message with a lasting impact. And he apparently has an episode of his podcast I recently got in touch with, came across, where he says, cover bands don't change the world, so don't be one. It's the people who write the original content, not the people who repeat it, right? I've also got one of his other books. I've downloaded it on Audible. I've not listened to it yet, but it's called The Accidental Creative, How to Be Brilliant at a Moment's Notice. And I'm looking forward to that one because I've enjoyed the other two. If you are into writing, then another person you can't not follow is Jeff Goins. I think about 4 years ago, I read one of his books called You Are a Writer, So Start Acting Like One. And since it's been 4 years, it's hard to remember exactly the points I got out of it. But what I do remember is that things like making time to write, or whatever your passion is, making time for it, that it's not going to happen on its own. That people aren't going to go, oh, you're an author? Here, we want to sign you up to our company. Write a book for us. No, you've got to choose yourself. There's another book similar to that by James Altucher called Choose Yourself. I listened to that a couple Christmases ago. No, I read it. That was a Kindle one I read. And just the idea of not waiting, if you're a musician, not waiting for a record company to come looking for you. Choose yourself. Build your platform. Make an audience for yourself. You can get your music out there and not stick to the pattern of taking your CDs with you to shows you perform, or waiting for what do they call them in music? A record label to say, hey, we want you and we'll sell your music and give you a teeny tiny portion of the royalties. Choose Yourself by James Altucher. And he's not Christian, by the way, so just be ready for some of his language, his saltier language. And another one, and it might surprise you, is I heartily recommend, if you're a writer, to get your hands on a copy of Stephen King's Memoir on writing. Yes, Stephen King, the horror fiction writer. And here's why. Some takeaways I got out of his writing. He talks about his archaeological writing style. He mentions how his inspiration comes in a way that he likens to archaeology. He finds a piece of something sticking out of the ground and starts to dig around it to see what else is buried there. And before you know it, you're digging up a spaceship the size of a city block. He also claims that when he starts writing, he doesn't necessarily have a plot in mind or a specific ending either. He just starts writing, and he takes it from there and sees how it goes. So his writing style might be frightening to some authors, but I identified with it because if you want to talk about being led by the anointing in your gifts, and in this case, writing, if you can trust the Holy Spirit to lead you in where you're going with your gifts, your talents, and stuff like that, but again, I'm talking particularly about writing, then I identified with that. I don't think he calls himself a Christian. I would be surprised if he does. But Stephen King's writing style of sitting down and seeing where the writing takes him, I identify with that. Sometimes I podcast that way. I start with the idea I have, and it's very prophetic, and I just go with it. And then in the end, I'm like, wow, I got to listen to this myself. Well, writing is similar to me. For me, writing is very similar. Sometimes from start to finish, I don't have the idea in mind where I'm going. And King talks about that, not having the plot in mind, but just seeing where the characters are going to take him. He talks about the importance of reading all the time and kind of, motivating me for why I'm giving you some recommendations on today's show. He talks about having a writer's toolbox, and mine includes a Scrivener, headphones for music to block out of my office. When you got a 2-year-old in the living room playing and screaming, you need audio headphones. I have software. I do some freelance work for someone who, sends me articles she doesn't have time to write, and they're 3 cents a word or whatever. And I need to put on software like Focus Booster or Self-Control, and they basically block out Facebook and things for me. The Self-Control app is for Macs. I don't know if there's an equivalent for Windows, but it basically is like a filter, and you block out what you don't want to distract yourself with, like Facebook and things, and how long you need to do that. So I set the timer for an hour and a half, and I just get writing. I just get doing what I need to be doing. And Focus Booster, I think you have to pay for it now, but it used to be a free app. And you turn it on, and you can basically put like 25-minute intervals of work with a 5-minute break. And the idea being like you're more productive if you sit down and you focus for 25 minutes and give yourself these 5-minute breaks, and you do like 6 sessions that way. But I mostly use the other one, the Self-Control. A few more. Seth Godin, I've listened to these as audiobooks as opposed to reading. I listened to Poke the Box and The Icarus Deception. And if you listen to that recent episode I did with Dave Edwards about the Icarus Deception and that Greek myth, you'll know where I'm going with this. The idea that, who says you can't fly that high? Who says you can't break out of this box? Who says you have to fit the norms of how this profession or that dream works? So Seth Godin, I'm a fan. I'm going through his books, but those are the 2 I've listened to so far. Quitter by Jon Acuff. He's the blogger who started Stuff Christians Like. And another one, before getting going, I got to end this recording and go pick up my daughter. But The 4-Hour Work Week by Tim Ferris. I listened to his podcast. I listened to his interviews. I've learned a lot about how to interview, just listening to shows like his and a few other ones I won't name yet, if ever. And I read his book about 4 years ago. Somebody I was freelancing for bought it for me, and I devoured it. I went through it, and there's a lot you can get out of it. People trip up when they read the book's description where it talks about the new rich. He's not talking about being rich, even though he is. People read that and think, oh, there's no way he only works 4 hours a week. And they totally miss the point. It's a book you need to read to get what it's about. You can't get an idea of what it's about by reading the title. But he talks about the things you can do to save time, the things you can do to maximize your time, the things you can do, for example, like his main thing everybody jumps on is having an assistant or having, only checking your email once a week. And then you're more focused on it. You don't waste your time being tethered to notifications on your phone, and you get on with things you're doing. He talks about how, if you had a job making $10 an hour doing something, but you could invest all your time, you could invest a lot of effort and energy into something for a short period of time that you can sell, and then it's going to, yield you such sales that it's like making $50 an hour instead of 10, so that you could work fewer hours in a week instead of, the usual 40 or 50 hour work week. Then yes, so he talks about ideas. He talks about online things you can do. I remember test studies and things of people who made T-shirts, the cost involved in setting up businesses online. They're comparing their expenses with their profits and seeing how, more profitable something they're doing is. And so I was reading that before I started my first Kindle book, and the idea of taking the time to invest into something that I can sell and get royalties on. And in many ways, I think if you're a missionary listening to this, or you're a pastor, or you're some kind of role like that in the body of Christ, you ought to read this book and see how God speaks to you and gives you ideas. I recently just read a book by Doug Addison called How to Flip Your Financial Future. And don't worry, it's not a name and claim it prosperity gospel book, but one section in the book, he takes time to talk about ideas for how to generate income. So you might want to throw that in there as a recommendation, but I especially recommend the 4-Hour Work Week. I always tell other missionaries they should read it to get ideas and suggestions for things that may use their gifts, their talents, and their skills to save them time in a week, but yet increase their productivity, their fruitfulness, their in some cases, their income. And so for me, that resulted in ways that I can be generating income. Ideas like a podcast like this, where if I tell you the links you can use, that I get some kind of affiliate commission or something. And then the more people who listen and do that, then boom, it's like I made this, my blog, I get from time to time people who they sign up for Audible. They get memberships at Audible, and I get a commission because people did it through my link or my suggestion. And by no means does that pay the bills, but like I said, I can buy 2 or 3 or 4 more books with those little paychecks. And in the last year, my website has been getting more and more traffic, so some of those links get more traffic than they did before. Okay, so like the 4-hour work week, takeaway is, creating a website, creating a link on my website, whatever it is, where the more traffic it gets, then, the more, like the term set and forget, I hesitate to use that because I haven't forgotten it. I keep checking to make sure everything's in order, that I'm still complying with the rules Amazon or Audible or other people I do affiliate marketing with. By no means is this paying our bills, but it's more than, anything that's more than zero, better than nothing, is helpful. It all adds up for us in the long run. So I'm going to quit there. And I've always wanted to do a book recommendation podcast with Dave Edwards. Today's show is not like that so much. But I wanted to give you some tools, give you some things you can get yourself out of the upper room with, and chase after whatever God might be calling you to do. But I expect this will resonate a lot more with people who may feel called to write. And Dave Edwards and I, for the last 5 years, we've kind of talked about doing a podcast where we sit down and talk about our book recommendations, particularly for the spiritual life. I think we'll still do that someday soon, but let me know if you go check these things out, if they make any impact on you. After that Dr. Brown episode, I had a few people write me and say, this was a kick in the pants for me to get writing. Thank you, Steve, for doing it. And another thing, and I want to make sure to throw this out there. People tell me all the time, I'm going to write a book. I'm thinking of writing a book. You know what? I saw what you did. I'm going to write a book. And they don't understand that book still that my tongues book in particular, it represents like 10 to 12 years of practicing writing. If you tell me you like to write or something, and I go, okay, do you have a blog? Do you have a link you can show me where you're practicing? And if the answer is no, I'm always dubious of what you're really going to accomplish with a book. I mean, you may write a great book based on the content that's ready to come out of you, based on maybe the stories or the memoirs or the knowledge that you have to share. But it'll miss something. And if you feel like I'm going to write a book someday, you got to get a blog started. You got to get started on a platform of some kind where you have a piece of real estate on the internet, not Facebook, not Google+, not something that the rug can be yanked out from under your feet at any moment through changing algorithms or policy updates, but a piece of internet real estate of your own. And I'm behind you. People send me their new blogs and links and stuff all the time, and sometimes I share the content on Facebook when I feel like it's appropriate. But if you want to start your own website, if you want to start a Blogger or WordPress.com or these free things, that's great. But if you want to get started on your own self-hosted website, WordPress.org, where you buy the domain name you want to use, and then you also have a hosting plan with some kind of company, $4 or $5 a month. A year ago, I changed to something called SiteGround.com, and I'm very happy with it. Not a lot of people have heard of it, but I too have an affiliate link for it, and I'll put that in the notes. And I don't share it just because I have an affiliate link, but because in 10 years of having websites, they are my favorite so far. It's a little bit costlier. It's at least $5 depending on your plan, but they have packages for buying a year's worth of your hosting all at once and get a heavy discount. It's a little bit more expensive than the other people if you're just getting started. But what I like about them better, and I feel like it was worth the money, worth the upgrade, is that they help you instantly. You sign into your support area, and it's almost like 10 minutes after I write something, somebody answers, somebody helps me. I've never had as fast response when I was with Clever.com or whatever it was I was with before them years ago. GoDaddy. I personally do not recommend GoDaddy, just in case you care about my opinion, but I'll leave that for another podcast another day. And so the speed and the things they offer, which are like overkill for your site if you're just getting started. They're good if you already have a big platform and you've just not built a website yet. And it can handle the heavy traffic that your site gets. I've had my site shut down a few times in the past from having too many visits because I was, using a bare bones basic hosting plan. So I got to get going. Thank you for listening to this. I'm going to check this out, listen to it, and see if I want to post it online or not. Because like I said, I've done one like this before and then I didn't post it. But if you're like me and you want to go for it, and recent podcasts of mine, like that interview with Dr. Brown or that discussion I had with Dave Edwards about going for it, I really lit a fire on you and you felt like you needed some more concrete tools. I hope today's episode was, I know it won't have done that 100%, but I hope it was a few steps more in that direction for you. So God bless you and fire on your head.
We hope you enjoyed today's show. If you'd like to subscribe to the podcast, you can find us in iTunes or on Stitcher Radio, or directly at fireonyourhead.com for more options. If you want to support Steve and Lily Bremner as missionaries in Peru, or find out more about what they do, be sure to head over to their blog at stevebremner.com, or check out Steve's Kindle books on Amazon and leave reviews of the ones you liked. See you next time.